friends. Welcome back to Cultural Savage. Appreciate you all sticking around with us. This week, I have Benjamin Howard. Ben Howard is an editor at the United Methodist Publishing House and the host of Let's Talk About the Bible podcast. He received his master's in theological studies from Lipscomb University and currently resides in Nashville. He has been described by his friends as a huggable muppet and not intimidating. That is fantastic.
That's one friend in particular.
That is absolutely fantastic. And I love that we're continuing this trend of everybody I talk to being smarter than me. This is just fantastic.
I don't know. I'm not sure it's good that people tell me that I'm smart. I feel like being told that you're smart just makes you think that you're smarter than you actually are.
No, I mean, I've been following you on Twitter for a while now, and you are both hilarious and smart. So I will feed your ego that way. Well, it's good to talk to you finally, like face to face. Why don't you just share a little bit of your story, kind of where you're at, how you got there, who you are. Yeah, just share some so our listeners can know more about you.
Like I would love to say that I have one of those like original stories that has like a long, winding road. But I don't. I have like one of the stereotypical ones of like I grew up in a conservative church. My dad was a preacher. My dad is a preacher at a Church of Christ church in like a small town in Ohio. He's been doing that since I was born. And so that was just life. Like life was you go to church on Sundays and Wednesdays. And I don't think I ever really thought that much about it because it was just kind of assumed. And then I, got to college in Oklahoma. I went to college 1,000 miles away from home because like there were 6 Church of Christ colleges, and that's the church I grew up in. So I was going to go to one of them.
Right.
That's the one I wanted to go to. So being there was kind of a different experience. Like for the first year, it was just kind of you blend in with a bunch of other people who were raised in the exact same style that you were, and you go to all the same things and you do all the same stuff. And then for me, I started experimenting with like other experiences with other things. And I've always said it's a running joke that every good thing in my spiritual life has happened because I had a crush on a girl and I was trying to impress them. And it didn't work out with the girl, but the concept stuck. So it started with like going to churches. And I remember I read Velvet Elvis by Rob Bell because I wanted to impress this girl named Kelsey, and that didn't work out. But like the book was kind of like, well, this is pretty interesting. And I started reading more stuff like that. And when you're 18, that stuff is like revolutionary. And it's, like, how did someone come up with this? And you don't know yet that like, well, what he's doing is he's compiling like 200 years of historical theology into this one concept, and you just weren't introduced to it because like your church didn't care about that stuff. But like it's pretty basic, like seminary 101 things. But I remember reading through that and then kind of going on mission trips to like I think I went on a mission trip every spring break when I was in college. And I think some of like the breaking points from like the weird moments for me where I was kind of like, what are we doing? Was I went to Honduras twice. And if you've never gone on like a little short-term mission trip to some like country that you're supposed to weirdly be like, whoa, us teenagers or us college students are coming in to like help and save everything. It's filled with like a lot of conflicting emotions if you were all thinking about it critically. Because you're both getting like a lot of fulfillment and you're getting a lot of people telling you what a great thing you're doing. And, oh, isn't it great that you as a college student are not spending this week partying and doing all this stuff, but you're helping people. But you're also just like, are we? What are we doing? Like,
yeah,
I'm digging a hole in the ground and there's like 40 people standing around me who are unemployed, who live here. And if we just like gave them money, they could dig the hole in the ground, and then they'd also have money to do other things.
Yeah.
And, like, and they'd probably be better at digging the hole in the ground. Like, there's just a lot of that kind of stuff. And you're like, you know, I'm not sure what we're doing. I'm not sure how this works. And, you know, at that time, I'm also getting more into studying theology. So my background in college is I was a history major. And the plan was to go to law school. I was a history major, poli-sci minor. I had done like con law. I had taken the LSAT. I was applying to law schools. And then the summer before my senior year, I ended up going to work for a church for the summer. And I was working as like it was this small church in Tulsa who like wanted to get an intern because that's like what the cool churches did, but they didn't have any idea what to do with an intern. And they got 2 of us. And I wasn't totally sure what was going on. And then I was like, so what do you want us to do? And they're like, well, we just want you to do whatever. And I'm, 21. I'm sort of reading up a lot of history, a lot of theology. I'm getting more into like reading like the Shane Claiborne Irresistible Revolution. I'm just like, we got to take it to the man and tell the man where they're wrong and all that kind of stuff. And so I spent the whole summer just like, I'm going to teach these like 60-year-old Church of Christ people. I'm going to lead them through the minor prophets. Why? Because I don't think we've ever studied the minor prophets in a church I've been in.
Wow.
And it went exactly as well as you would like. Them just sort of like indulging your weird like calling America an empire when you're 21 and they like served in Vietnam or something.
Right.
And you're just like, sure, like let's have this conversation. And it's an interesting experience in that like it made me feel like, okay, I actually want to figure out some of this stuff a little bit more. And my entire career path has always been, I basically just did stuff that I was interested in, and stumbled into a job and stumbled into the next thing and stumbled into the next thing. So I, spent that time.
Yes, that is my son.
Spent that time, studying the minor prophets, studying theology. And then at the end of it, I was like, the other thing that had happened that summer is that I lived with a lawyer who was like an elder at the church. And I just watched what his life looked like and how he lived and what he did and what his job was like. And I was like, I don't want this. I don't want this at all. I think I hate this. Like, I still, like, I pay attention to a lot of like legal stuff, and still, like, when I think about like the way you have to think as a lawyer, like, you have to think about the law, not about justice. And those are different things.
Right.
They are designed, like, when they're working at their best, they work in tune, but they are rarely working at their best.
Right.
And I was like, well, I don't want to do this. So I ended up going to, I was like, I guess I'll go study theology. I'll go get my, my MDiv. And my grandparents lived in Nashville, and I could go live with them. So I moved 2 days after graduation, had not yet been accepted to divinity school, and was just like, I guess I'll just go do this. And so I went to Nashville. I studied at Lipscomb, which is, where my grandparents, it's a Church of Christ, another Church of Christ school. And at this point, I went from this is when I first really started getting my taste of like being the person who's starting to be liberal in a conservative space, or starting to be progressive in a conservative space, where like you're encountering a lot of stuff, and it's just kind of like, oh, I am the person who's poking the bear now. Like, right. I've always been in this like comfortable position, or like I'm with other people who are sort of seeking the same thing as me. And now I'm in this position of like, oh, well, I'm the one who's poking at stuff. And I was doing that and working full time. And at some point I was just getting burned out of like trying to be serious about everything all the time. And that's when I started blogging, which is when Aaron would have first run into me on the internet. And what I was basically writing was like I was trying to do stuff with friends, and I was trying to do stuff that was like experimental and fun. And it started with, your kind of generic little tropey, like I'm gonna write about like the theology of movies, and then it just got weirder and weirder and weirder.
It did.
And I at one point did like a deep theological reading of Timber by Kesha, as if it was like somehow like a hymn. I don't really know how it worked, but like I just did it. And it was fun. It was weird and experimental, and I started really enjoying writing and really enjoying editing. Around that same time, I started working at United Methodist Publishing House. I started kind of working my way up and basically became an editor there. I'm short-circuiting like 5 years worth of stuff.
Right.
But like, a lot of that is the progression of, just bouncing all over the place and being curious and trying to figure out what am I thinking, and being like, a lot of times I trust my intuition on a lot of things. Like I feel like I'll come into some situation and I'll be like, I feel like this is the right answer to this question, but I don't know why it is. So I want to figure out, do I just want it to be right, or is it actually right? And like I can figure out like these are the kind of intellectual tent poles that I'm buying into, but I don't know how to name yet. Like that's always what like those books like the Shane Claibornes or the Velvet Elvises or things that I've read since then. Like one of my favorite books is The Structure of Scientific Revolution by Thomas Kuhn, because it's about how do you know what you know, and how do you understand what you know. And it gave me a lot of language to talk about things that I intuitively knew, but hadn't figured out how to say yet. So that's a lot of mine, is like, how do you figure out how to say the things that you intuitively know to be true?
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
That was really winding. So
no, you're good. You mentioned like this curiosity and like just sort of leading you, like following by intuition and stuff like that. And I'm wondering, like the faith you've grown up with, how did that sort of manifest itself in your curiosity?
Like how did the faith I grew up with kind of manifest in curiosity?
I guess your faith in general, not necessarily like what you grew up with, but like how did it sort of manifest itself through your curiosity?
Well, one of the things that it's really worked out for me is always trying to figure out. I've always been the kid who would just like ask why 100 times, and just because is not an acceptable answer. And that went for like, why did my parents make X decision, like this decision, and it goes for, why do we do this thing in the church? What is the point? Do we do it because it's symbolic and it's meaningful, and that symbol is in some way training us to respond to life in a different way? Or did we just do it like that in like 1200 AD because like something like baptism or something, or it's like, oh, did we do this? Are we doing this now because did we baptize people in like creeks and things because that was an important symbol of running water? Or did we do it because if you baptize them in like stagnant water, they would get malaria and die? And there's things like that where like
fair question.
We've symbolized these actions where sometimes we just took them for like, we did them for like very pragmatic reasons. Like we don't like have wine during Eucharist because it's the divine drink or something. We have it because like water would kill you. Right. So like it's fine to like develop symbolism on top of that, but like it's nothing, none of this is sacred. Like we made it up, a lot of it up. Like it's stuff that we invented, and stuff that you invent can be important, but you need to know why you're doing it. So that's kind of how my curiosity has always functioned, is trying to figure out, what is the thing behind the thing? What is the thing that is motivating this? What is the reason and the rationale behind this? And that kind of curiosity tends to put you kind of at loggerheads with people a lot of the time, because you are constantly questioning the sincerity of people's response when they say, oh, I believe this. And you're going, right. I don't believe you. I don't believe that's why you do that. I don't believe that's why you think that, because nothing else that you're doing is in alignment with this.
Yeah.
And I don't think you know what you're doing at all. But that's kind of how my curiosity manifests, is just kind of trying to figure out, what do I actually think? What do I actually believe? What is actually motivating me? Even if that is sometimes an ugly thing to discover, because it's important to even discover like the ugly parts of yourself if you want to actually fix them.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the biggest thing, is like, I think a lot of people talk about curiosity as if it is a unalloyed good, and that anything that you're curious about will just like, you'll just discover like rainbows and puppies. And I'm like, no, if you really start digging, you're gonna get someplace. You're gonna go like, oh, I've been doing this for a while, and I was like pretty sure that I was a good person, and I am not confident in that right now.
That's great. I'm wondering, you said nothing's sacred, in the fact that like it's not inherently sacred. Like it's not like, do you think that later on down the road we are going to pass down sacred, quote unquote, things to our generations after us? Like, do you think that we are going to do that? Or do you think that a lot of that stuff, especially in church settings, has sort of been locked and loaded into place and aren't really moving?
Do I think that like the things that we hold sacred will be undone, or do I think that we are going to create new sacred things?
Create new sacred things, I guess, is the
100%. We are creating new sacred things all the time. We just feel very uncomfortable when other people say that we're doing it.
Like what?
I would say a lot of the conversations that we have around, I want to preface this with like, I support all of the progressive conversations we have around gender and race, but we are making those sacred conversations. We're like, you have to say like the special words, and you have to say things in a particular way. You have to repeat these phrases because the phrases have been imbued with a lot of power. And I think people get real uncomfortable, especially people who grew up religious, if you start saying this is a new religion. But it does have a lot of those, in like academic terms, elements of the cult. Like in academic terms, like they'd always talk about like the Christian cult, not like a cult like it's a bad thing in the way that we talk about it, but just like, this is a group of people, they have a collective system of beliefs and thoughts and things that they accept by faith. And I think we have a lot of these kind of things. I mean, it's even in the word that we use, like when we talk about like sacred cows. I think we have a lot of these in progressive Christianity. I think we have a lot of them in progressive politics. And that's fine. Like, it is good to have symbols and sacred ideas and sacred thoughts. It's not good when you don't think that they're sacred, you just think they're immutable. Because then you are setting yourself up for a scenario where a generation behind you is going to decide that they're all iconoclasts and they're just going to break everything. And you're just saying, come break this thing. This is the thing we hold sacred. You should come smash it. Like, and I think that's a danger to just not being to not acknowledging what it is that's happening. I think there's a lot of things that we have held over I'm trying to think of, I think, I'm not even exactly sure how to phrase this. I'm kind of thinking on my toes here.
That's okay.
I think progressive Christianity holds the idea that like we are good as sacred. And that is a mistake. It's one of those things where like I think it's very seductive to believe that the people who think like you, the people who agree with you, the people who are like you are inherently good and other people are inherently bad. Because it just sets you up to be able to let other people call you hypocrites, and you call the people who, mess up, and you say, oh, well, they were never really part of us, instead of accepting that like all of humanity is like a little bit messed up. Like we all have the capacity for evil, because most of the time evil is much more mundane than we think it is. And we are all inherently good because we're created in the image of God. And you can do a lot of bad things and think you're a good person. And you can do a lot of good things and think you're a bad person. So maybe you shouldn't take your own view of yourself and your side too seriously.
Right.
Because you're incentivized to think of yourself that way. Like, I think that's one of the things I try and think about a lot when you're thinking through like some of like the biblical stories or things like that, is like, if we injected some of these people into our modern context, would we think they were good or bad? And some of those people, like Paul, were just like, oh, Paul was, a jackass. I'm like, not then, he wasn't. Like, he is doing great work for then.
Right.
And yeah, it doesn't totally work and it feels a little strange now, but that's like because we moved a bunch of the lines and then we didn't like adjust his words. Like his words got written in stone and then the world kept moving.
Right.
And I don't know, like I just kind of feel like it's always a problem when you think that I'm not like one of those people. And I think that's my fear within a lot of Christianity. That's my fear within a lot of like organized religion, is a lot of the organization is built around having to be able to say that like I am steady and I am unmoving and I am the foundation that we can build this on.
Do you think we do things like that because it serves us in some way?
I think we do things like that because it comforts us. Like, I think it's really hard to think of yourself and think like, I remember, I think NPR might have done this a couple years ago. There was some book that came out and I think it was just like, it was about like whether business leaders were psychopaths or something like that.
Okay.
And I remember, I think NPR, question. I think maybe This American Life around that same time did like an episode about like, could you be a murderer? And I think it's one of those questions that makes you really uncomfortable if you think through it, because like the answer for almost everyone should be yes, in the right circumstances. Like under a certain set of circumstances, you could be capable of it. Like your chances of doing it could be like almost none, but like that's not zero. And I think it's uncomfortable for us to think I could do something that's that easily bad. So, okay, here's a story that like is coming out today. Did you watch the show Cheer?
I did not, no.
Okay, there was a show called Cheer on Netflix, which was basically like a documentary series that followed around this like cheer squad.
Okay.
And it had this one character whose name was Jerry Harris, who was just like the breakout star of the show, and he was like really encouraging, and It was all about like his quest to like, you know, be a college cheerleader and how inspiring it was. And today he got arrested for basically trying to get minors to send him naked pictures of themselves and like child pornography. And I think a lot of people think like, oh, we got tricked by this charismatic person into thinking he was good, and he's actually bad. And I want to be like, no, he's actually the person you saw. And he's also this person. Because we contain multitudes, and we are very, very good at telling ourselves that the thing that we're doing and the reasons we're doing something aren't bad, or that they're not real, or just kind of convincing ourselves that we're different and it's not the same thing.
Right,
and
we're the exception.
That's what I mean when I say like I think evil is much more mundane than we think it is. Like we think there's going to be like a moment where like you have to like pick or choose, am I going to do the good thing or the bad thing? And what I'm saying is if you get to that moment, you already did the bad thing.
Okay.
Yeah, like you got there a long time ago if you actually have to make a choice. And I think I think it just makes us feel more comfortable to think like that there are good people and there are bad people in the world, that the world is a little bit more black and white. And I think thinking that also means we don't have to think about things like that. We can just say, you did a bad thing, I can get rid of you now.
Right.
And I was actually I almost tweeted something like this today, which is like, I feel like it's much easier to be empathetic and honest if you think that people, like if you think everyone is capable of great evil, even if you think they're inherently good. Like I think humans, people in general, like are good. Most, not just most, like I think everyone is good. You are created with the image of God in you. Whether or not you're letting that like burn bright or whether you're kind of trying to destroy it, that's kind of up to you. But like I think you as a person are inherently good. That doesn't mean that I don't think chaos exists, and doesn't mean that I don't think that like it can do weird things and you can talk yourself in circles and do stuff that's messed up. And I think it's good to be able to say like, we're all capable of this. We all have the capability to be good or bad, but that's not inherently who we are. We are inherently good.
Okay. So, in this idea of like what we're capable of, what role do you think trauma plays in that?
So I'm kind of talking on my feet again here. Like this isn't like
this isn't a dissertation.
Really
it's okay.
Like, huh?
I said, this isn't a dissertation. It's okay.
Yeah, I've never gotten like deep into like the psychology of trauma. But I would say like from what I've seen, I feel like trauma is like, it's almost like cauterizing wounds on the body. Like there are some parts that just, to deal with that pain, there are just some parts of you that are not going to be able to, I'm not sure how to say this. I think those of us who haven't gone through as much trauma basically have to be able to remember that when other people are responding to things. Like it's one of those things where like I think you can say everyone's good if you haven't gone through, like if you can talk about that in a purely intellectual level. Right. If you have dealt with someone who was the manifestation of evil to you, or where you've gone through some kind of event that has, that any type of interaction with someone it just brings you back there over and over again.
Mhm.
I can understand, like, yeah, calling you to empathy for all people is kind of a dick move. Like, it's not like the nicest thing to do.
Fair.
And I think that's one of the things that, like, one of my struggles, honestly, is trying to figure out how to be empathetic and understanding of people who I think are acting irrationally, because I prize rationality so much, and I prize being able to think through things intellectually so much. And trauma's not rational.
Yeah.
Like, you don't respond or cope with it by reasoning your way out of it, because the act itself that, like, led to your trauma wasn't rational. And you can't ask someone to, I need you to think on my pure utopian way of thinking, when that's not the experience that they're kind of working through. Yeah. I think that's one of the hard, like I said, one of the harder things for me is to try and not just view the people who it's easy to view as, like, villains, as, something more complicated, but to also view the people who I would view as heroes as something more complicated, and the people who I would view as allies, the people who I would view as, like, on my side, as something more complicated, and to just really remember, like, I think this is kind of what I'm trying to get. Most people don't think like you. Like, most people, I mean, everyone has not had your experience. No one has had your experience. No one has had the inputs that you've had in your life. No one has had the same processes of learning and all those kind of different things. And a lot of what we're doing in life is trying to find people who understand us and seek safety, or, like, I don't know. We're all trying to find different things. Like, for me, I'm always trying to find, like, I'm trying to figure out the world. For a lot of people, that's not what they're trying to do. And it's not, none of this is important to them.
Right.
Like, they're not thinking about this. Like, I think about that with, like, my mom a lot, where I was like, my mom was great when I was growing up, because she would just listen to me ramble for, like, hours. And I'd be like, do you understand what I said? And she'd be like, no, but I know that you like talking it out. And I was like, yeah, that's just how it works. But yeah, I'm not really sure how it plays out with trauma. I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I think my inability to answer that question is kind of the problem that I'm trying to deal with myself.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, like you said, trauma's not really rational, so it's hard to, like, objectively sit back and look at it and say, oh, this is how trauma affects the way that we view other people.
Well, and here's the other thing that I'll throw out there. Like, this is a thing I try and remind myself of often. The most difficult person for us to analyze is always ourselves. And that's not because, like, and that's really because for everyone else, we have limited information. Like, for everyone else, you're looking at, like, a series of dots, and then you're connecting the dots. For you, you have every dot. So trying to see, like, the changes and the shifts, like, the way I like to phrase this is, like, I'm with me all the time, so I can't see how I'm changing. I need other people to tell me how I'm changing, because they have moments where they don't see me and then can compare me to the next time they see me. And I kind of feel like that might be part of the trauma thing. Like, I think it's like, you have to have people who can tell you what's going on with you. Like, I'm really interested in, like, analyzing the world. If you ask me to, like, analyze myself, I'm like, it's a thing I do constantly, and I am no closer to answers. Like, I'm just thinking about myself, like, all the time, trying to figure out, why do I think this? Why is the world like this? Why does this thing do this thing? And I'm like, I don't know. And I think that actually gets into why I said earlier, like, I'm very skeptical of people telling me I believe this for this reason, because I'm thinking about my own thoughts all the time, and I'm with them, and I don't know why I believe the things I believe. Like, I couldn't give you a rational answer for that. They just sort of got there through like osmosis or something. So like, I'm real skeptical that like you're so certain about it.
So on that note, like, why are you still a Christian?
So here's this is my real answer. I think of belief in God as something very existential, which is there is either a God or there is not. The answer to that question is not something I can truly get at in life. Like, there is an answer to the question. It's not an answer that is obvious or visible or possible. So if there is an answer, but you can't possibly know the answer, what do you do next? Well, my view is there's two different stories. There's the story where there is a God, there is a deity, something that we call God, there is an order to the universe, and there is therefore like a way to live in harmony with that order. Maybe it's through Jesus, maybe it's through some other means of something, but like that we're trying to commune with the thing that undergirds reality. Okay. That's the if God does exist. The other side is we're making this all up, and meaning is completely imbued in what we agree makes meaning. And one of those stories makes me like real depressed. And the other one makes me a little optimistic. And so I'm going to go with the optimistic one, even though I'm not sure which one is right or wrong. I would say that the one that like we create meaning and like we are kind of making this up as we go along definitely feels more logical.
Yeah.
But like logical to what end? Like, what are we doing here? Right. Like what's the point? Like, if the point is like you make up the rules of the game and you go play the game, are we all just fighting to figure out who gets to make up the rules to figure out who gets to win, and then I don't know, time runs out? Like, that seems like kind of a bummer. It's much more beautiful to me to think of the world as like, this was made with purpose, this was made with sense in mind, that there is some kind of underlying something here that makes this make sense. So like, one of my favorite I really love John 1, but I don't love the way that we interpret it a lot, where like we always talk about like the word, and then we conflate word with Bible for some reason. The word that's used there, logos, like it's not just like logic, and it's not just the word. Like logos was like a concept of like the thing that undergirds reality, the thing that ties existence together and makes it make sense. So when you're saying like in the beginning was the word, you're saying like in the beginning was something that made sense and tied it all together, and that was with God. And I'm like, that is a beautiful way to phrase that. And then you take that thing and it becomes like a person, and I'm like, okay, even if this isn't true, it's a damn good story. And it's like, it's damn good symbolism.
Yeah.
And like, there's a certain part of me that like, just like on an aesthetic plane, is just like, if the way I'm shaping my life is being shaped by whether I believe that God exists, whether I believe that the story of Christianity is true, or whether I believe we're in this kind of like existential, we kind of create the world that we want to live in world, I think I'm a better person in the world where I believe that God exists, where I believe that there's like a thing that I'm chasing that's real, and that's fundamental, and that it is like in harmony with how reality is supposed to be. The other thing is there. I just think I'm worse if that's what I'm trying to like live into. And that's kind of why I would say, like, why am I still a Christian? Because I think it's prettier. Like,
it's a legitimate answer. It's a legitimate answer.
Yeah.
I actually really like that answer. I mean, especially with the idea of like we make our own sacred things and we just hand them down and everybody thinks they're sacred until an iconoclast comes along and breaks them, and then everybody's like freaking out. I really like the idea of like having something beautiful to fall back on at some level. Just feeling like it does make you a better person.
That's if only because when I was in grad school, I used to like briefly flirt with like a lot of like Jacques Derrida philosophy, because like which person who got into progressive theology didn't flirt with like a bunch of postmodern philosophers,
right?
And I always kind of viewed like the idea of like, you know, is there a fundamental, like, is there like an ultimate truth or something like this, as like, I think there is, but I also like think of it as like, I think of truth as being in like a house, and that house is just like surrounded by windows, and you can look in all the different windows and you can see truth from an aspect, but you're not going to get there. And the house is kind of spinning and moving, and sometimes you have to like go find it again because it's like in a different part of the valley or something. I don't know. It's like you're constantly you are in motion.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It stays the same thing, but you're spinning around it constantly, and you're trying to figure out your way back to it over and over and over again. There's a Derrida line that's basically everything is deconstructible except for justice, which just means that like you have to constantly be deconstructing everything in search of this ultimate thing that you're trying to build truth around. It's one of the reasons I keep going on these rants on Twitter, and I think no one like understands why I'm doing it, about like the law isn't real. Like we just make it up. Like we just made it up. Like the reason, and like that it is more important to talk about like what do we think is moral, or what do we think is good, or what do we think is beautiful, than what is legal. Like like the reason we don't murder people is not because someone told us it was illegal to murder people. We don't do it because it's bad. Like it hurts other people, and we think that would be bad, so we don't do it. And there's a lot of things like that. And I wish that we thought beyond the constructs that we build up a little bit more, to be like, what is it trying to do? What is it trying to be? What is it trying to make us into?
Those are good questions.
Yeah, I don't have any good answers for them.
No. I got nothing, but those are damn good questions. So let me ask you this. Let me ask you, this is my favorite question to ask people.
Okay.
In light of everything we've talked about, in light of nothing being real, in light of everything being made up and the points don't matter. No, but in light of everything we've talked about, things being sacred, being passed down, all of these things, being a good person, but also capable of horrible things, like all of this, what does that do to your articulation of the gospel?
I would say so. I used to kind of have this running joke of like, I was really into Julian of Norwich when I was in grad school, and I was really into Augustine, and as I've talked about, I was really into Derrida. So there's a Julian Norwich quote that is something like "sin is behoovely," which means it translates as "sin is necessary." And the way that she understands it is, or basically the way I understand it is, you kind of have to start with the fact that the world is broken, because that's just blatantly obvious. Like, if you just like look around, you're just like,
Sure.
well, if someone did plan this, this isn't what it was supposed to be.
Right.
And then the good news is that, like, that's not how it ends. And that this doesn't just go downhill until there's nothing. So the way I used to phrase it was, my faith is Julian of Norwich read through Augustine, read through Derrida, which is everything's shit, but it'll be okay, probably. And that's kind of how I think about it, which is, I think the good news is you can look around yourself, and like the concept of sin is so ever present that like we're trying to convince ourselves that it's not real, that like we're all fine and like everything's going great. And I'm just like, it is like the only, like, there's some theologian who said that like original sin is the only objectifiably provable theological concept.
Yes.
Just,
okay. Yes.
What are you thinking? Like, this is obviously true. And to some extent, I think the gospel is just saying, like, the fight that you are fighting, the fight to be good, the fight for the world to be the way that it's supposed to be. You may think you are on your own, and you may feel like you are on your own, and you are not. You may feel like you are irredeemable, and you are not. You may feel like all of this chaos and pain is just never ending and swirling. And that's not how the story ends. And that's not where God is going to leave you. That like the thing that undergirds reality in the universe didn't abandon you is just hard to see right now. And that's kind of how I view the gospel, of like, it's the promise that everything will be okay. Probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
I like that. Yes, what is that? I love my children. This is the chaos.
Hi.
This is my family. Welcome. Yes.
They're very nice.
We are cleaning the couch under.
Can you close the door? Whatever.
That's great.
My youngest especially has made several appearances so far. At one point, he was using me as a rocking chair. And
very cool. I get it.
We just kind of roll with it. But no, I love that. And to be honest with you, the part I love the most is the probably.
Yeah.
Because it's not a matter of certainty. It's not a matter of like, yeah, everything will be fine. But it's a matter of, best bet is it will be. And if we hedge our bets on that, we get to lean into it a little bit more so.
Every once in a while, I'll tell people, like, I don't think there's anything I believe with like 100% certainty.
Sorry.
This is my wife.
You're good. Hi.
We're cleaning.
You're good. Don't worry about it.
And I'm going to take the dog because she's panting. You probably even hear her.
This is my
Oh,
wife.
great. Yeah, you have a bunch of things. Every once in a while, I'll basically, like, I'll tell my friends sometimes, like, there's nothing I believe 100%. But there's a point at which, if I believe it like 65%, I kind of just got to go with it as if it's true, because you gotta move at some point. At some point, you got to act like the thing that you sort of believe is true, and you just gotta run with it, because you can't wait until it's 100%. You can't wait until you're certain. You gotta move. Like, that's the risk in life, is that we are constantly having to act on beliefs that we have no way of knowing if they're true. And that's true every day in everything we do, but it's true existentially in the way we live our lives. Like, at some point you just have to make the call of like, I think this is right and I think this is wrong and this is what I'm going to do. And no one's going to prove you out in life. You just have to run with it. And that's how I feel about it, which is just like, do I think that there's a heaven? Probably. Do I think that there's a hell? Probably not. But like, I've been wrong about things in the past. I'll probably be wrong about one of the big ones. Like,
right.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's really good. I want to call it a hopeful pessimism, but it's not pessimistic. It's just kind of like, this is what I believe mostly, so let's lean this way, and here we go.
Call it a calculated risk. I mean, that is kind of what I mean by it. Like, it's a calculated optimism. Like, and I don't mean that to be like, some of the ways I can talk about this sometimes comes off like I'm being very calculating, like I'm like trying to like weigh and measure which way. And I'm like, no, most of it I'm doing on feel, like everybody else is. I generally feel fairly optimistic about it, but that's because it's honest to me. Like, above all, like, the thing that makes me feel comfortable with it is that I'm not hiding anything from myself when I say this is how I believe and this is what I think. And it's not just like a saying to say, oh, sometimes I might be wrong about things. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure I will be. I've changed my mind about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to say stuff that is off base, that I'm going to be objectively wrong about a lot of things, that I'm not going to understand the world because it's real complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you got, like I said, like, you have to move. At some point you just have to say like, I think this is true, I'm going for it.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're just going to get caught. You're never going to do anything.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
I hope it's useful.
It is. Yeah. It goes back into what you said of, this is something that's beautiful. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, so if people want to follow your Twitter rants about the law not being real, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Ben Howard OPT, which used to be like the name of my blog was On Pop Theology. I haven't had it for like 5 years, but I kept the Twitter.
Right, but you kept it strong in the name though. You represent it.
Kept the Twitter straight. If you want to find the podcast, if you go to Facebook and just search "Let's Talk About the Bible" or go to letstalkaboutthebible.com, that's something I do with work. But it's me and one of my coworkers, one of my co-editors, just basically reading through scriptures and then talking about it and being like, what's up with that? Like, why did that thing happen? We get a little irreverent at times. I believe I called the moment of Moses making the covenant with God basically a nightmare, or like basic nightmare fuel or something like that. Because, I mean, it is. It's like they like divide an animal in half and then he sits it within a dark, and then like a weird ghostly fire shows up and you're like, come on. Like,
yeah.
So, I mean, but honestly, like, I talk about a lot of this stuff too. I talk a lot about like, you know, the importance of like embracing reality and understanding that like we doubt stuff sometimes, but like the story we're being told is beautiful. If we can get over the weird parts and we can get over like the weird people doing weird things that are saying that they're associated with us, there's a lot of beauty to be had, and there's a lot of depth. I think that's the one thing I want to share at the end of this. Like, I think one of the things I remember when I was young was I learned all of these Bible stories. I learned all of these things when I was in Sunday school, going, 4 times a week or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized that like the levels and the depth of it, and like the true profoundness of it because it was so ordinary to me. Because it was like, I genuinely wonder sometimes if like the people who convert to Christianity are just like, are being given a gift that those of us who grew up with it didn't get. Because you get to encounter this, like the originality and the uniqueness of what you're being told instead of just assuming that that's normal. And there's something special to that. So there's a lot to unpack if you get into it. It's just hard to get into because, you know, it's a book that's like 2,000 years old and translated in a bunch of different languages, and it's still to tell.
No, but definitely check out the podcast. I've listened to some of the episodes. I love it. It is enjoyable. Let's Talk About the Bible is the name of the podcast. And again, if you want to find Ben and his lovely Twitter rants, Ben Howard at Ben Howard OPT.
Yeah.
Ben, you have been an absolute joy to talk to. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciated the invitation. It's fun to, you know, rant about things.
It is. It's always fun to rant. All right. Well, we will talk to you later, okay?
Thanks.